There's a beautiful saying that I like to quote, which goes like this. If you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a month, get married. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. And if you want happiness for a lifetime, help somebody. And I think it's beautiful and it's inspiring. And it applies to all of us, regardless of how much or how little we have. I think all of us have experienced some form of joy after we have helped someone or after someone has told us that they have found us very helpful. But the reality is that the opposite is also the same.
A question asked courageously, answered honestly, and lived authentically can change your whole life. For me, that question was, how can I use what I have, what I love, and what I know to bless the lives of others? The School for Good Living and this podcast are one answer to that question. Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I know that the world can work for everyone, but that it won't until it works for you. I've created this to help you make the difference you were born to make. It's a series of conversations with thought leaders who are moving humanity forward. And in each episode, I explore their lives and the work they do. I also ask them to break down how they've gotten their books written, published, and read. This podcast is all about exploring the magic and mystery, and sometimes the misery, of the creative process. So if you have a mission, a message, and the motivation to share it, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Hello, everybody. Today, my guest is Jenny Santi, a philanthropy advisor to some of the world's most generous philanthropists and celebrity activists. Jenny is also the author of the acclaimed book, The Giving Way to Happiness: Stories and Science Behind the Life-Changing Power of Giving. Jenny works with philanthropists to make their aspirations become real, and she explores how giving changes the giver. Winston Churchill once said, "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." After earning her MBA and working as a management consultant, she found herself working in Singapore, where she became head of philanthropy services for UBS, a bank which is the world's largest wealth manager. She led these philanthropy services in Southeast Asia for families and individuals who have investable assets of $50 million or more. She developed relationships with the world's leading changemakers, including philanthropists, celebrity activists, nonprofit leaders, and other visionaries. And in 2013, she started her own firm, Saint Partners, after she got a call from the Han Foundation, as in Goldie Hawn. Goldie wanted to know if Jenny could help her family with their philanthropy. And in this conversation, we explore what it means to give, about how giving changes the giver, and how we can give even when we don't have millions and millions of dollars, how we can still practice finding purpose and joy when we share what we have, whether it is money, expertise, time, or love. In this book, in this conversation, we explore the 5 things we get from giving. Jenny combines scientific research with a large number of interviews, personal anecdotes, some of the people that she talked to in researching this book. Of course, Academy Award winner Goldie Hawn, Nobel Peace Prize winner Muhammad Yunus, supermodel Christy Turnington Burns, Teach for America founder Wendy Kopp, philanthropist Richard Rockefeller, environmentalist Philippe Cousteau, activist Rick O'Barry, best-selling author Isabel Allende. So many, many people from all over the world with diverse backgrounds who have all found unexpected happiness and fulfillment through their giving. Also, toward the end of this interview, Jenny opens up and shares something that she's only recently begun to talk about, which is her experience with clinical depression. I think her humility and her vulnerability are extraordinarily powerful. I also love that before writing this book, Jenny didn't know much at all about publishing, didn't have a background in this or connections in this world, but as she describes it, became obsessed with the idea of writing a book, wanted to make a contribution to others in this way, and she did. And to me, that's so inspiring. And what she shares about what she learned in the process, especially if you want to write a book, I think you'll find valuable. But honestly, even if you don't, just that drive to share what one knows with others, is pretty extraordinary. Also, Jenny is an animal lover, a student pilot, and a global citizen who's called Manila, London, France, Singapore, and New York City home. She also is an accomplished artist. I'm so grateful that my path has crossed with Jenny Santi. Oh, and Deepak Chopra wrote the foreword for this book. Even Deepak's thoughts in the first few pages of this book are worth the price of the book, but it's truly an amazing and inspiring piece of work. I hope you enjoy this conversation with my new friend, Jenny Santi. Jenny, welcome to the School for Good Living.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Brian.
Jenny, tell me, please, what's life about?
Wow, that is a huge question. The first thing that comes to my mind is that life is about what we make of it. Because isn't life just the sum of the little moments that we have and the decisions that we make and the people we surround ourselves by?
I think so. Certainly. I know that's a big question, and it is my favorite question for Uber drivers. Yeah. And one of the things I love about that question is I learned so much, not only from people's responses, but from how they answer. Right? Like people will say, you mean life or my life? You know, something like that. But at any rate, let me go right into your book, The Giving Way to Happiness. I've read almost all this book. We set up this interview on fairly short notice, which I'm really grateful for you to grant me this interview. So I didn't finish the book, but I read the beginning and I read the end. I read more than 2/3 of it. At any rate, what I want to ask you is, who did you write this book for? Why did you write it for them? What did you want it to do for them?
Sure. I was obsessed with this project from the time that I thought of it. The reality is that I thought of this and I just had to do it, regardless of the fact that at that time, I didn't even know how to begin. I had no context in publishing. I had never written anything bigger than a report, maybe a business plan of some sort. I didn't really even know the difference between a publisher, publicist, editor, agent, all those personalities that I eventually came to know in the writing, in the book world. And I was actually inspired when I realized through the course of my work, I have this very unusual kind of job where a lot of it has to do with philanthropy and making philanthropists' aspirations become real. So in the course of doing that, I met a lot of very heroic people doing amazing things. I met a lot of nonprofit leaders, very committed to their causes. I met a lot of philanthropists who were very generous with whatever they were doing to make a difference in various causes. And I knew that most of the attention that we pay when we hear about these things, most of the attention goes to how these efforts or how these people change the world. But I knew from my job that giving changes the life of the giver. I've seen that so many times in the private conversations that I've had with these people. And I've seen how people are transformed by their own giving. And I was just so compelled to write about it because I knew for sure that it was not something that was commonly discussed. And my goal was to write this for a wide audience, for an audience of people who wanted to do something with their time, their talents, and their treasures, regardless of how much, how little they had. So this is not something that I wrote for the very wealthy set, even though that's the area that I've become associated with when it comes to my professional life. But this is really for anyone who wants to make a difference, or anyone who has found themselves on this path where they're giving a lot and they want to get more out of it, get more satisfaction, get more results. And also probably for those people who have found themselves disillusioned, dejected, or possibly even burnt out by their own acts of generosity.
Thank you for sharing that. So to give the listener a bit of context, let me ask you, who are you and what do you do or what have you done? And I know, and I just want to preface that by saying, I know that any answer anyone would give to that question is so far short of who we really are, whatever we really are. So I'd like to ask the question this way. When you are introduced or when you introduce yourself, someone asks you, who are you and what do you do? How do you like to answer that question?
I usually like to answer that question by, I usually like to avoid answering that question by describing my profession immediately. Because one thing I've observed in our culture here in this country and in also many parts of the world is that we so immediately define ourselves by our professions. And when we go to a party, when we go meet someone for the first time, perhaps in a cocktail or a conference setting, the first two questions are inevitably, what's your name and what do you do? And I've reached the point when I'm almost put off by that. And I think the reason I'm averse to that is I think it just makes us very judgmental, if not openly or outwardly, subconsciously. Once we hear what someone does for a living, we begin to put them in buckets in our mind. We say that, oh, okay, so this person is not very interesting to me because his work has nothing to do with whatever I'm interested in. Or, oh, this person can buy my product. Or, oh, this person can introduce me to someone that I've wanted to meet because of my business, my product, my services. And it all becomes a very transactional, economically motivated exchange. So I read this somewhere recently that instead of asking people, what do you do or where do you work, you can ask them a question like, what do you like to do? And that would give you insight as to who this person really is.
Yeah. So let me ask you that question. Maybe that's a better question. What do you like to do?
What do I like to do?
What are you passionate about? What are you curious about? If there's something you're working to master, what is that?
I really like having deep connections with people. I'm a bit of an introvert, regardless of the fact that for work, I often have to speak to an audience, sometimes a very public audience. I like having a very in-depth one-on-one conversation.
You're in the right place.
I'm in the right place, except people are listening in on it. But it feels, at least for now, a very private conversation. I like art. I like expressing myself through painting. I'm drawn to things of beauty. I love meeting people who are a source of inspiration and energy. And I love to laugh. I think I have a bit of a wicked sense of humor, which gets me into trouble a lot of the time.
Give me an example.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
I don't know how much this podcast allow, but let me ask you.
We'll bleep any F-bombs. You can say whatever you want.
All right.
But
Okay. So what do you call a line of people outside a Vietnamese noodle shop?
Tell me.
Fuck you.
Oh my goodness. You know, when I met you, I never would have expected you to tell me a joke like that.
I know. Don't be fooled. No.
So tell me about growing up, because we've known each other for 8 hours now. Now
maybe 9.
Yeah. And you shared with me some of your experience growing up in the Philippines.
Yes.
Tell me what that was like.
Well, the Philippines is a beautiful country, and it's a hot spot now for tourism, and it's home to, I think, what's been voted over the last few years consistently the most beautiful island in the world, Palawan. You know, but
this is where you grew up, right there?
I didn't grow up there, but I grew up in a country where there's a lot of beauty, and unfortunately, it's also a place where there's a lot of poverty. It's a developing country, and that's just a reality. And I was fortunate to be part of the more, they say they're the haves and the have-nots. I was privileged to be part more of the former than the latter. And yet I saw the conditions of the poor every single day. It was just a part of life. It was not hidden from my view. It was visible when I was a child, on the way to school. We would see street children, beggars knocking on the car window. inches away from my face. And then that was practically a day-to-day occurrence. I would see news of calamities and how many more people got displaced from their homes and all sorts of horrific things like that happening to people who were not very far away from me, literally just living steps away or a few minutes away from where I was living. And I think as a child, I didn't really know how to process that, but I think it planted the seed of idealism. So later on, after my college years and my postgraduate degree, I started working in consulting, but I didn't find that very fulfilling. And I was really curious what could possibly be out there that would allow me to make a difference, but also honor the unique abilities and interests that I have. And I was fortunate to have had a lucky break that led me to this kind of role that I have now in philanthropy, in working with wealthy families and individuals, public figures, and helping them turn their philanthropic aspirations into action. And
what was the lucky break?
The lucky break was that, UBS, a Swiss bank, right? They have a division called Philanthropy Services. And I didn't know this at that time when I first heard of this, but there are arms in private banks that cater to the needs of these very privileged, successful entrepreneurs, individuals, families who made their own wealth or inherited wealth, and specifically helping them figure out matters that relate to their giving. So it's all about, let's say, how to structure a philanthropic foundation, how to start a family foundation or a family charitable trust. And that was my job. My job was to work with those people to make those things real. And I've been doing this now for the last 12 years. I'm no longer with a bank. I'm doing this on my own together with my business partner. We have a company called Saint Partners. And, being an entrepreneur is very difficult and challenging, but I think it's great that whatever I do, I'm able to really express who I really am. Which makes me now think, why do I not like to talk about my profession anyway? I just don't like to be boxed in, because there are also lots of other things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I'm that same way.
Such as art and writing and animals also I'm crazy about.
Yeah. I know you shared with me before we began the recording that you lost both of your dogs within the last year. I'm really sorry to hear that.
It's very sad.
Yeah. Well, and you live in the city, you live in New York City.
Yes.
And you have big dogs.
2 golden retrievers.
Those are big dogs for New York City.
I know. I had, things happen in New York City that probably don't happen in other parts of the world, because people live very busy lives, and there's a really, I guess there's a sense of community there that might surprise people who don't live there. I moved there 5 years ago after living in Singapore for 7 years. And the reason why I had 2 golden retrievers in a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan's Upper West Side is that I actually had a co-parent. I had a co-parent who's the original owner or the original person to these 2 dogs, but he was going through some life transitions. He just got divorced. His kids were moving out of their apartment. He had downsized from this large, 5-bedroom apartment to more of like a bachelor pad situation. And as a result, he just had to keep his dogs mostly in doggy daycare most of the day. And when I met him, I met him because we were both actively involved at that time with the Desmond Tutu Peace Foundation, which is another thing I want to tell you about. When you're working in philanthropy, when you're volunteering for causes that you care about, you meet these people who become such important parts of your life. And I like to joke, I met my baby daddy. I call him my baby daddy. We had these 2 dogs, and he's a dear friend. And yes, we co-parented those dogs. It was a beautiful experience.
Wow, that's great. So I want to ask you more about the work you've done in philanthropy, and I want to turn it in a way that will benefit the listener beyond interest or curiosity it might satisfy. And what I mean by that is, I think there might be a perspective for many people that philanthropy is something only the rich or the ultra wealthy engage in. People like, I understand many of your clients, without naming names, are rock stars, other artists, athletes, very successful business owning families and things like this. So some of society's 1%, right? And as you said just a few minutes ago, who you wrote the book for, was really anyone who wants to be more fulfilled from the giving they do. And, no matter how much we have, we can give something, right? So I guess where I'm trying to steer this is, maybe there's a part of me that's looking to shape a perception. And I don't know if this is even a useful course of conversation about what philanthropy really is and why it's important, but more like even beyond that, about giving, whether we have great wealth or not. And so I want to ask you about that. What have you learned? What's the question I want to ask here? It's something around, what have you learned about giving that's applicable to everyone, not just those who have amassed a great fortune?
Sure. There's a beautiful saying that I like to quote, which goes like this: if you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a month, get married. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. And if you want happiness for a lifetime, help somebody. And I think it's beautiful and it's inspiring, and it applies to all of us, regardless of how much or how little we have. I think all of us have experienced some form of joy after we have helped someone, or after someone has told us that they have found us very helpful. But the reality is that the opposite is also the same for anyone giving big or little amounts. The truth is that giving can also lead us to feel depleted and burnt out and taken advantage of, whether it's because we feel like people are asking us for money all the time. There's an endless stream of solicitations, or we begin to feel a sense of compassion fatigue because we see so much tragedy going on around us. Oh, there's another hurricane. Oh, there's another homeless person.
There's another public shooting.
Exactly. Oh, there's another public shooting, right? And we become so desensitized to it. So how's that? I mean, on one hand, you say giving is the most wonderful thing you can do, and helping someone will make you so happy for the rest of your life. But come on, the truth is, no, it's exhausting. And I think that's something that everyone has felt in every demographic. And that's something that I'm also very curious about. And I've covered that in my research and my writing. And I'm happy to share with you a few things that I've learned along the way.
Please.
Yes. One thing is that it's become evident to me that the number one reason why people feel burnt out or find themselves in this situation where they feel very depleted is not because they've run out of money or they've run out of time, but it's because their giving is not aligned to their ultimate passion in the first place. That the giving has started maybe because they were just forced into it. They were trying to avoid embarrassment and thus wrote a check. They were trying to save face, so they showed up and volunteered for this certain charity, but their heart was not really into it. And so as they keep doing this over and over again, as they are asked for more time or more money, they feel less and less interested in it.
And is that what you mean? Is that a symptom of compassion fatigue or an example, or is it something different?
It's just a symptom in a cause. I mean, you get fatigued by something because you weren't interested in it in the first place. You do it once, it's no big deal. You think, oh, it's just a check. It's just a one-off. Sure, I'll volunteer. But if you don't really feel a personal connection to what you're giving to or what you're spending time on, sooner or later, you'll just feel like, I've had enough of this. This is really not worthwhile. This is just either a waste of time, a waste of money, and you don't want to keep doing that. And it's not a source of joy.
Yeah. So how can we find or create that alignment then?
It's all about finding your passion. It's all about taking the time to be deliberate about it and taking the time to step back and ask yourself a series of questions, really, and just observe yourself. What are the things that really move you? What are the things that keep you up at night? What are the things that you really feel so passionately about that no matter how hard it becomes, you will keep fighting? For me, for example, it's all about animals. I will never get tired of animals, of helping animals. I will get exhausted sometimes from volunteering or being, I don't know, just picking up dog poop when I'm spending time with these animals.
I think it's pretty easy to get tired of that.
Exactly.
Even if you are aligned with your passion.
I will always want to be around animals, and I will always want to do something to help them out. But
that explains so much. In your book, you write about the bear farms in China.
Yes.
And about the dolphins.
Yes.
It's pretty remarkable. I would imagine, especially if you went firsthand and investigated this, or just talking to people who are working on the front lines of this, that will you talk a little bit about how you have pursued your passion, not just for animals, but by sharing with others about giving, and what you learned in those, like talking with Rick and, is it Peggy?
Sure. I spoke to a lot of people in the course of writing this book, and it's been a few years since that all happened. But these are things that happen to me pretty regularly as a result of the profession that I've chosen and I've found myself in. When I speak to those people working in the front lines of very difficult, emotionally charged situations and challenges, animal welfare, animal rescue is one. What else is an example? Is dealing with survivors of abuse or rape or horrific things like that. You can imagine that it's not always a very happy setting. It's probably going to expose you to a lot of very shocking things, and it's going to be very upsetting, and maybe you'll be traumatized by some of the things you'll see. So can you imagine if you didn't care about those things so passionately? Can you imagine what that will do to you? It will probably make you a very resentful person. It will probably make you just walk away at some point and just turn around and say, I've had enough of that, and it's really not worth it.
Yeah. What else has stood out to you, or what else have you learned on your journey of interviewing so many people? Because in this book, as you mentioned, you must have interviewed 50 people, who are, or more, maybe many more. And I'm actually going to preempt my own question, because there's one in particular that selfishly I want to know more about, which is Muhammad Yunus. Mm-hmm. When you had the opportunity to be with him before an interview.
Yes, that was a funny experience, because Muhammad Yunus, who is a Nobel Prize winner for his work in microfinance, he's treated like a celebrity. And I love that's the case, because look at this. He is a professor. He is someone working in microfinance, but his command of a room and his presence and how he is sought after is pretty much like how people treat celebrities. And I think that's really cool. I think that speaks a lot to how people these days are searching for meaning and inspiration. But when I met him, he was in a very busy, amidst a very busy day, when the only time they gave me to speak to him was when he was having his makeup done in preparation for an interview at CNN, and also join him in the car on the way to another venue in Manhattan.
Yeah, anytime I think I'm busy, I'm going to keep this in mind as a reference. No, I have 15 minutes I understand he actually spent about 5 hours with you.
Something definitely more than 15 minutes.
Yeah, but when
maybe
he says,
2 hours.
I will talk with you while I'm being make-upped in preparation for my national TV appearance. Like that is amazing. And what a commitment he has also to sharing what he knows.
Crazy.
Right.
Yes.
So what did he tell you?
Well, I remember asking him a question regarding something he said before. He said that he's always happy. He said he's just always happy. And I asked him, how is that possible? How is it possible that you're always happy when you're working with people in the bottom of the pyramid? And isn't that what his work is all about? Uplifting people from poverty. So I imagine, that must put you in some really dire situations where you see how the poor people live and you go to some really glum places. It can't all be that fun or glamorous or even comfortable. And how are you always happy? How could that possibly be? And he said that helping others is super happiness for him. He called it super happiness. And he said that one of the reasons that he finds it very fulfilling is because of the approach that he chose to take, an approach that is very sustainable. It's not something that makes him depleted, because it's not about an endless solicitation for funds and an endless trying to find where to get the money, trying to find the donations for this and that, but really all about empowerment and really all about finding solutions to problems through social business.
And that was what I thought was so remarkable, that here was somebody who engaged in, who basically invented microfinance, right? Which he, in his humble description, says is just lending money to poor women.
Exactly.
Right. But I was so intrigued by what you said, not only about his view of super happiness, but about business as the approach to a sustainable and fulfilling way of going about helping people to live great lives.
That's the approach that works for him. And, another thing I learned is that there's no cookie cutter approach. We are very different from one another. And what might work for you might not work for me. What causes I'm passionate about, you might not even care about. The things that make me come alive probably bore you. And that's okay. That's okay. But the key things are to really pay attention to what are those things that really do interest us deeply and organically. And another thing that I would say is that it's so important to give your time. Give your time, because it's really the best expression of your care and concern for something. And the fact is that we don't all have the same amount of money to give, because there are people who are rich, people who don't have much. But we all have the same amount of time. We all have the same 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it's up to us to decide how much or how little of that time we devote in service. And in the process of doing that, I know that we will discover that it becomes very fulfilling when we spend time on those things that really resonate with us and we really care about.
Before we move completely away from Muhammad Yunus, I just want to touch on this other part that you wrote in the book that I thought was really interesting and really beautiful, where you describe him saying that there are two things inside of us, selflessness and selfishness. Mm-hmm. And that economic theory has been based on the selfishness part, not the selflessness part just yet. That's part of what he told you. But that aspect of selflessness and what you're saying now about giving time, right? It's relatively easy to give money, relatively easy. And I know many people seem to have this notion that, if they won the lottery, if they had a big windfall of some kind, an inheritance, or, their business blew up and they got a big payday or something, then they would give, right? What I think is interesting is to, not in a judgmental way, although I hear the judgment in the question, is I wonder with those people, well, what are you giving now with what you have? And proportionately, is it equivalent to what you think you would give when you had this big payday? Do you see that as well, that people maybe who are less willing to give now? Like there's not some magical day where it becomes easier to give, and I'm asking kind of a clunky question here. So let me just pivot that question for a minute. But I remember something I heard Tony Robbins say once when he said, we never get beyond scarcity. We have to start beyond it. And I was like, what does that mean, to start beyond this idea of scarcity? But what have you seen when it comes to people's mentality with giving and scarcity with wherever they are? Not just ultra wealthy, but the average person.
I think sometimes we think that when we give something or we give something of ourselves and we've lost it, we've lost something. We have less money, we have less time, we have less of something because we gave it away. But what I've found is that there's so much that we get from giving. Yeah. And let me just share with you my 5 categories that I've observed as I spoke to all these people and then work with many different people in the last decade or so. One is about how giving helps us find our purpose in life. And isn't that something that we all ask ourselves on the darkest days? Like, what is this all for? What's the purpose? What's the point?
Yeah, I've noticed when things are going well, I don't tend to be asking that question.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So you're saying, what do you call these things? There's 5.
The five things that you get from giving.
Okay.
Yes.
So number 1 is a sense of purpose. Yeah.
Yes. Number 2 is that it elevates your career into not just a job, but a calling. When you choose to do something that has some kind of social purpose that allows you to give back or that allows you to make a difference in the lives of others. And again, isn't that something that we all question? Isn't that something that we're all concerned about? Because we spend so much time at work and we try to find fulfillment in the kind of work that we do. What I've found is that people who have work that somehow makes a difference in the lives of others have a higher sense of fulfillment in general. And it's amazing. If we look at it that way, if you give something of your career towards service, you get so much in terms of fulfillment, which is something that so many people search for.
Yeah, for sure. So a sense of calling.
A sense of calling.
Okay, what's number 3?
The other thing is that giving or giving to something that we feel very passionate about allows people to heal from very painful experiences that they've experienced in their own lives.
So you're saying this helps givers. Givers can heal through their giving.
Givers can heal or overcome tragedies and traumatic experiences that they have gone through by helping others who are going through the same things. And we see these things in, for example, the methodology of Alcoholics Anonymous, how people would come face to face with their own addictions by being someone's sponsor, by being there for someone who's going through the same thing. Yeah. And what do they get in return? They stay sober. Yeah. They are reminded of why they are doing this. And I think it's such a beautiful thing. That's just one example. But other things, like there are many examples of wealthy families, for example, who set up foundations in the name of a loved one that they lost to cancer or diabetes, other diseases, and commit a certain amount of money to help advance science in that particular field, to find a cure for that disease or to provide medical assistance to families who cannot afford the treatment for that disease. And I think it's just really beautiful, and it helps make people who have suffered or who are grieving make sense of what they've gone through.
Yeah, and that in a way relates, I think, back to the first thing about purpose or meaning, right? So that healing is a process of giving meaning to what someone has gone through or what someone has lost.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so what's number 4?
Number 4 is how giving allows us to meet incredible people whom we otherwise would not have met.
Like our doggies, like our baby daddy.
I like my baby daddy, right? And
so I would call that, I'm sorry to jump in.
Yes.
I would call that making friends. But what do you call it? Just making incredible connections?
Making friends and just finding love in some ways.
Okay. That's a pretty big benefit.
That's a huge benefit. Because if you think about it, there's a very different dynamic in someone you meet in, for example, a racing day or a car show or a yacht club, or someone you meet at a bar, at a club for a fun night out. There's a very different dynamic among the people you meet in those settings. And I'm not saying it's a bad dynamic. I'm just saying it's a different dynamic from someone you meet in the context of your charitable work or someone that you meet in the context of your giving, your voluntary work, or even someone you meet at a philanthropy conference.
Yeah.
It's just a completely different level altogether.
Well, and I saw that in your book with this story, which I didn't know, with Wendy Kopp for Teach for America.
Yes. Teach for America's founder, Wendy Kopp, actually met her dear husband. I can't remember the specific story, but they met in this context where they were both serving.
Because of her work.
Because of her work.
He applied, met her.
Now I remember the story. Yes, that's
And then in your book, he tells the story about how many other marriages have come out of all the Teach
Thank you for reminding.
Right?
It's funny how sometimes you don't remember what you yourself wrote.
There's so much. And I know you took a period of years to write this. But I was just struck by what you're saying here. I love when you said it's not just friendships and connections, but also love.
Yes.
And then right here in your book, there's a touching example both of someone who's making a couple who's making an incredible impact around the world through their organization. And one of those benefits that they probably didn't intend when they started was that people inside their organization would also connect and start their own families.
There should probably be a dating app for that, huh?
Yeah. Philanthropy or something. Yeah. Which I love too, what you shared earlier before we started recording about the etymology of the word philanthropy, the root meaning of the word. Will you talk briefly about that, and then we'll come back to number 5?
Sure. When we hear the word philanthropy these days, it's become synonymous to big ticket gifts like, oh my gosh, Warren Buffett giving billions of dollars to the Gates Foundation, or Bill and Melinda Gates committing so much money in pursuit of a cure for malaria. And it sort of makes us feel like, no, we're not philanthropists, or we're not capable of philanthropy because that is not within our reach. Mm-hmm. But if we look at the etymology of the word philanthropy, it really simply means the love of mankind. Philos means love, anthropos means mankind. And so it's that simple. It's our expression of love for one another in the way that we serve each other, we help each other, we are there for each other.
I just think that's so beautiful. And it reminds me also, I love the quotes that you put in your book. There were so many that I hadn't heard, and I am a quotation connoisseur. I fancy myself that. But
I used to have, when I was in high school or grade school, I used to have a notebook where I would write all the quotes that I found very touching. And
that doesn't surprise
really
me
that.
Because you include so many great ones in here, and there's just a few. This one by Mother Teresa that I think is along the lines of what you're saying now, that it's not how much we give, but how much love we put into giving. So beautiful. Let me take us back to number 5. So tell me, what's this 5th thing we get when we give? Hey, thanks so much for listening to part 1 of my interview with Jenny Santi. Tune in again next time as we finish our conversation. Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life. Explore life's big questions. Create answers for yourself in community. Get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.